Thanks for checking out the Blowout podcast. If you're looking for genuine perspectives throughout the world of sports, without the bias that comes from a national media outlet, well, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Ty Schwartzlow, but before we kick things off, we need a quick pep talk from Coach Bill Yost.
I don't want them to gain another yard.
You blitz all night!
Now we're in the right frame of mind. If you don't find that exciting, do me a favor, check your pulse. Hello and thank you for checking out the Blowout podcast. I am your host, Ty Schwartzlow, here for a special video edition of the show. If you saw my interview with Winona Chiefs player manager Brett Schmidt, you can tell that there's a little bit of value to be had to see some facial expressions. Certainly, it's just going to be looking at me, so if you want to listen to it audio only, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. But we think this adds another facet to the show, and we continue to move forward with that. Today's episode will just be myself, no guests. For those of you to know exactly what to expect, we're going to be at about a half an hour today, so we'll get you a rundown in terms of what we're going to be talking about. And we've got a number of different things, certainly a lot going on in the world of sports, and I've tried to limit it to things that I truly am passionate about. We can sit here and speculate on a number of the bigger stories, but really like to keep things fresh here on the Blowout. So we're going to start talking about something near and dear to my heart, and that is the Milwaukee Brewers and their great start to the season. They're in first place in the NL Central, and I guess here at the All-Star break, it would seem at least that they are contenders. We'll talk about what has been their secret to success. There's one person who I don't think is getting enough credit for his contribution, and I certainly will remind you and let you know why I think that is the case. We'll then move on to another Milwaukee team. This one hasn't enjoyed nearly the level of success of the Brewers, at least in the last decade, we'll say, and that is the Milwaukee Bucks. Mouthful to say, but with new ownership and a phenomenal draft night, well, they're parlaying that into potentially a big-name head coaching candidate and even a big-name front office position all in one. So we'll talk about some of the details of that and how I think it affects the Bucks' big picture organization and where they're headed as an organization. I think ownership is one of the most underrated facets of the sports industry, and certainly we'll have my take on that. Then we'll move forward, continue talking about the NBA draft, and talk about Winona Winhawk within our viewing area. So you may not be familiar with him if you're outside of our HBC region, but that is Alec Brown, the second-round draft pick for the Phoenix Suns. I think it's the perfect fit, and I will tell you why. And then we will move into NBA free agency. As we said, we're going to keep the speculation to a minimum. However, there is some big news that could shape the landscape of the NBA and certainly will affect some local teams as well. But it sounds like the big three have made at least a choice, and it seems like some of that speculation has turned out to be a waste of time, as you think all 30 teams, LeBron's going to fit fine on any one of the 30 teams. It's not worth going through each and every one and saying how he fits in. To me, that's a waste of time, but even bigger waste of time would be mentioning that whole tangent in the intro. But let's continue today's episode rundown. We'll also talk about the World Cup, specifically the U.S. I don't want to get too big picture oriented, not being a soccer expert myself, but as a USA soccer, football, however you want to call it or refer to it, fan, I got to feel good about the United States making it out of the group of death and into the knockout round. I'll tell you why I am very excited and why all of a sudden must-see TV, at least in terms of the USA's participation in the World Cup. And we'll finish things off. We're going to steal a page from the Sports Buzz's book. And my favorite sports movies, we'll probably go to about 5 or so. But we'll finish things off on a lighthearted note. Certainly something to get the gears spinning, and I'm sure that some of you out there are going to disagree with my selection. So without further ado, let's get the show started. And let's start things with the Milwaukee Brewers, and today's opening say is going to be about the Milwaukee Brewers. And before entering the season, I suppose you could say most of the attention was on Ryan Braun, and it was for all the wrong reasons. And you think of the teams a couple years ago, think of even Prince Fielder's last couple of years in Milwaukee, and it was really the Braun Fielder show. The depth wasn't nearly to the level of the place that it's at right now within the organization. You did certainly have the top end, you could argue, is a little bit better, and Braun as an individual has taken a step back, but it's because of the depth within the organization that they find themselves atop the division, true contenders for the postseason, and with the pitching depth, I'd say even could make a run to the World Series. Hey, maybe even win the thing, which would be big news in the state of Wisconsin, and would certainly make Mark Attanasio proud. And that is, I guess, my main point, is how important ownership is within sports. Think about Bud Selig in Major League Baseball owned the Brewers, and they had the 26-year drought. Certainly Attanasio came towards the end of that, but you had Attanasio able to snap that playoff drought. And that's been huge. He's shown a commitment to win, to put a contender out there on the field. It's not a Miami Marlins type of blueprint where you're going to stack up and make a run every few years. Certainly the Marlins have more World Series titles, but as a fan of the team, I would much rather watch the Milwaukee Brewers year in, year out, as opposed to the Marlins. And that's not revolutionary, and that's certainly not worth getting caught up on. What is the fact that if you have an owner who takes enough of the onus on himself to make the team good and to invest both monetarily and in other ways, I suppose, as well. When you have an owner that's willing to make that investment, it's extremely helpful to your organization. And I think the Donald Sterling situation illustrates perfectly how a bad owner can really just suck the life out of an organization. And that's not any shot necessarily at the Bucks ownership. In the brief time that I've seen this new ownership group, I really like what I have seen, and certainly that leads us into draft night, and the Bucks were able to snag Jabari Parker, the Chicago high school basketball legend, and going to be excited, it sounds like, to make the trip up to Milwaukee and play close to home, and certainly doesn't sound like he's too disappointed in not being picked number one. The thing that has me excited, at least from a roster standpoint, is you have Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is going to, with that long arm span, we're talking like Kevin Durant type of body here, with that arm span length and his ability on defense, I think he's going to be able to cover up and mask some of Parker's deficiencies very well, and then vice versa. Parker on the offensive end is really going to be able to cover up some of Antetokounmpo's deficiencies. On the wings, I really like this Bucks roster. I think that they are a playoff team. Larry Sanders is certainly a question mark, but if he can come back and return to the form of a couple of years ago and put some of the off-the-court issues aside and is able to play back to that level, you have all of a sudden got a team who is defensively going to be probably in the top half of at least the Eastern Conference from a defensive perspective, at least inside and on the wing. My question becomes about the point guard position. I question whether Brandon Knight is the answer, but to segue perfectly into the next story is Jason Kidd coming potentially to the Bucks. Now, by the time you hear this, it may already be a done deal, but it sounds like the Bucks will send a second-round draft pick, probably in next year's draft, 2015, to the Brooklyn Nets in exchange for Kidd, and it sounds like Kidd will have the added responsibility of making some personnel decisions. Now, exactly what the title and what role that is yet to be determined, but the thinking being Kidd can go to Milwaukee, coach a young potential superstar in Jabari Parker, but also, as Bill Parcells said, he gets the chance to shop for the groceries as well as cook the meal. You hear a lot of times coaches, that's a big deal if you don't have the same amount of pull. And I can't blame Jason Kidd with the roster that he had. This is a Brooklyn Nets organization and team, specifically general manager Billy King. They made a trade in a win-now situation, and now whether that was because of the GM or the owner is up for debate, but nonetheless, they're not in a good position moving forward as Garnett at the end of the line, Paul Pierce end of the line, as well as free agents. So you've got a roster who is not going to have a lot of top picks. I certainly don't blame Kidd. I just question whether his end goal was to get out of Brooklyn, just to get a little bit more power. I question what his motivation was. However, I think it's a great fit in Milwaukee. I think he'll really improve the young point guards that they have in Nate Walters as well, the former second-round pick last year, as well as Brandon Knight. So if you're a Bucks fan, you've certainly got to be encouraged as they look to be on the precipice of some unprecedented success. And I think that landing Jabari Parker was certainly the hardest part of the puzzle. Piece of the puzzle was to get that superstar. But you combine a number 2 pick who in most other years would be a shoe-in number 1. I think last year Parker is easily number 1. You put him in. But you've got a number 1 pick with potentially Antetokounmpo, who in last year's draft, they're saying if you redrafted it today, he'd be the number 1 pick. So in a weird way, you've got 2 number 1 level talent guys who are entering their rookie and second year. So as a Bucks fan, you got to be very, very excited. And with the new ownership, I think has really got to give you a little bit of a new lease on life, in all honesty, with the track record that the past ownership had. So it's not a shot, but it is being honest, and good things could be around the corner for the Bucks. And a couple other teams that I had my eye on was obviously the Miami Heat. It got a lot of a buzz. Shabazz Napier appeasing LeBron James. How much a late round pick is going to convince the best player in the league to stay in a team? I wonder. I really do. I think Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh opting out of their contracts plays much more of a factor. But nonetheless, you have a couple of big names. There's certainly a recognizable college athlete going to the premier and most noteworthy team in the league. So that is obviously going to draw some headlines. And then how about Doug McDermott going to the Chicago Bulls? The Bulls need some offensive help, certainly some shooting. After losing Kyle Korver a couple years ago, haven't quite been able to replace that. So you've got McDermott, and I think he's a perfect fit. The only question now is Derrick Rose healthy? And do you add Carmelo Anthony maybe to that mix, as the rumors go that he has visited Chicago, certainly during the regular season. He was able to talk a little bit with Joakim Noah about Coach Thibodeau and potentially what playing for him would be like. So the wheels there are turning. I think Carmelo Anthony is the big fish in the pond. His decision will really make the ripples. And that is because the Miami Heat, it looks like, are going to stay together as they're all opted out of their contract. And what that means is they'll probably all take less money to stay together. It sounds like LeBron James, though, for the first time in his career, may be the highest paid player on his team. That is absurd to me that the best player on the planet has been in the league for 11 years and is yet to be the highest paid player. It says something. What it does, I don't know exactly, but I would argue that it says a lot about the selflessness of LeBron James and the sacrifice that he's willing to make to put himself in position to get championships. So reading it, it blew my mind that he's played in the league for over a decade and has not been the highest paid player on his team. But one pick within the draft that we'll go one positive and one negative, and we'll start with the negative, unfortunately, and that is the Levine pick for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Not too happy to be going to Minnesota. It would be putting it lightly. We'll talk to Justin Barrientos, resident Timberwolves fan, about what does he think? How does that make you feel when a draft pick clearly doesn't want to be a part of the organization, or at least his first reaction is not all too positive? So we'll have his reaction on that, but it's certainly something that caught my eye, and I think it's worth bringing up again. But in terms of local talent, we have former Winona Senior High Windhawk Alec Brown, 7'1", stretch four, maybe even center, drafted by the Phoenix Suns in the second round. And I think that is the perfect place for him to go with his shooting ability at 7'1". Remember, this is a guy who in the draft combine was towards the top, I believe, in big men in terms of shooting drills. The only question comes in the level of competition that he played at. Although with the Phoenix Suns, they certainly need some help off of the bench. Certainly could get a chance to see a meaningful role and see the NBA floor in his rookie year. So that's very exciting. And certainly we'll have Justin Barrientos to talk about him as well, because Justin covered him. Also got some continued coverage, and it's a big story around here, so we will be covering it here on HBC. So be sure to check out the website, hbci.com/sports, and see all our coverage on Alec Brown and his journey to the NBA. And we've talked a little bit about free agency. We talked about Doug McDermott. The final thing I have to say, going back to Carmelo Anthony, be careful what you wish for, Bulls fans. If you want Carmelo Anthony, one, the contract is going to be enormous. Think of that Carlos Boozer contract. I mean, obviously it's a little extreme. You don't think Carmelo would fall off like Boozer did after his, but my point being, you get a big contract like that. If the player doesn't match the output on the floor, it's very, very tough to get rid of that contract and really ruins any flexibility that you have. So I question whether Carmelo Anthony's a good fit. I know offensively he'll be fine. It's does he buy into the defensive approach and how does he fit in with Coach Tom Thibodeau? Certainly would like to see it happen, but as a Bulls fan, from a Bulls fan perspective, I should say, I'm not so sure that's the best thing is signing Carmelo Anthony, especially with the fact that you've got a Doug McDermott, an offensive-minded player in the draft who is 1, cheaper, 2, younger, and I would argue 3 may even be a better fit for the Bulls system. So with that, we will move out of NBA talk and in general just about move out of off the field talk in general as we move to on the field, and that is the World Cup. The United States able to advance after their loss to Germany. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but nonetheless, they made it out of the group of death. To be honest, I didn't even turn on the game. It wasn't. It takes a little bit away from the value when before the game you know a draw will be good enough for you to advance. I compare it to almost like a Week 17 game with the Colts they had every year, where at Week 17 you knew the Colts were going to put out Curtis Painter, and whoever it may be, Jim Sorgi. And you knew that Colts Week 17, you're probably not tuning into that game. I know Germany is one of the best teams in the world, but you need to draw. The odds of the Germans blowing the United States out, they outplayed them about as well as they could have, it sounded like, and still only managed to win by 1. I'm not trying to criticize or say that you wasted your time if you watched the German United States game. I'm sure it was great. All I'm saying is that this Belgium the knockout round, that's must-see TV. That's what I'm really looking forward to. And not only that, you've got the fact that the United States is in unfamiliar territory, at least in my lifetime. They haven't made it to this stage, so I am very curious to see how do they compare as the competition continues to get stiffer. Able to make it out of the group death, certainly an accomplishment, but now is, I think, when the real viewing, the prime of the viewing in terms of the World Cup comes. And I'm certainly very excited to see how this young World Cup team is able to play it as they continue. Got a young Belgian team as well. So it should be a good matchup on Tuesday. Chances are, if you're watching this, may have already happened. So regardless of whether they're able to advance or not, the United States certainly taking a step forward. And I think Jurgen Klinsmann has silenced all of the critics, and certainly I have no criticisms of him as he's handled everything from the cutting of Landon Donovan to the Josie Altidore injury to the perspective that he had after the German game. You know, I like this guy. I really do, and he's the kind of guy that you want running your team. I realize it's a national team, but he's the guy that you want running your organization, and certainly learned from some of the best, and very, very glad to have him. And certainly the Altidore injury, we'll be curious to see whether he is able to play on Tuesday or potentially later on in the World Cup. But it has certainly improved my passion for the sport of soccer, or football, as they call it everywhere else. But it is truly a great game, and you can criticize the lack of scoring, but I say that is its biggest strength. You've got these low-scoring games, so how often is it stoppage time? One goal will make the difference, so really a white-knuckle type of event, almost reminiscent of NHL hockey. So you throw in the fact that you have the national pride and all the various countries from around the world, it truly is, must-see TV. And you know what else is must-see TV? That's the Sports Buzz. Tune in every Wednesday at 5:30. We also re-air Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 5:30 every day. Tune in to see host Justin Barrientos, myself, Paul Van Beek, and Jeff Tice. We argue about anything in the world of sports. I'm usually right, and you can check out our Power Play segment. But just a little plug, if you're in the area and you're a subscriber to HBC, tune on TV25 and check out the Sports Buzz. We have a lot of fun doing it. It's right here in this very place that I am sitting. It's a lot of fun, but before we get to the final segment, I do want to say that the reason I bring up Sports Buzz, because this was a segment, we talked about the movie Major League 2, and we don't need to waste too much time on that. It's a good movie, although I think I'd be fooling myself if I said it was on the Mount Rushmore. But to me, there are two movies that come to mind when you talk about top sports movies. The first is Friday Night Lights. From a serious movie perspective, the book is phenomenal too. We're talking about movies here. From capturing a true life story of just how much athletics can mean, specifically football in the state of Texas can mean to a community, Friday Night Lights does it better than anyone else, and it is just a phenomenally made movie. And I think from a serious perspective, that is really in a league of its own. Although that is a good movie, but it's in a league of its own. As I think you would probably have to put... You'd probably have to put it at the top, and then from a comedy perspective, it's obviously Major League. With Bob Uecker's performance, whether you've got it on and you are distracted doing other things, or you're living and hanging on every word of the script, it's going to keep you entertained, and Bob Uecker is going to play a major role in that. You throw in Lou Brown and the cast of characters. Don't take my biased word for it. Major League players have even said it is the most well put together representation of Major League Baseball, and that is coming from the men who live at 162 games a year plus. So, I mean, I've got to side with them. I will say that I know there's probably some viewers out there. I probably haven't mentioned your favorite sports movie. I know Justin Barrientos is probably thinking, where is Hoosiers? Gene Hackman's performance? Are you serious, Ty? Well, having seen Hoosiers is good. It's not great. I don't put it in the top. Just a little bit before. I don't think it resonates quite the same with my age group, my generation. Just a little too hokey sports movie for me. Great story. I'm very glad that they won and everything, but, not that I just ruined Hoosiers for people. But if you disagree, you think I'm a moron and my movie taste is awful, hey, follow me on Twitter. Shoot me some hate mail. That's fine with me. At Ty Schwartzlow. Otherwise, feel free to check out our show page at hbci.com/TV25. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today. A reminder that the Blowout podcast is powered by HBC Sports. None of this would be possible without their support. We'd like to thank them. But with that, send me your feedback on Twitter at Ty Schwartzlow. Otherwise, feel free to check out the podcast and be ready and on the lookout for our debut on iTunes, as you'll be able to subscribe in the very near future. But that's going to do it for another episode of the Blowout Podcast. Stay tuned. Later this week, we'll have Justin Barrientos and Landon Evanson talking baseball, basketball, a number of different things going on. It's a busy time of the year. But for this episode, that's going to do it. I'm Ty Schwartzlow. Thanks for tuning in.